Picture Central America across the second half of the 20th century, and you're probably picturing juntas, coups, death squads, and civil wars that dragged on for decades. The region built an entire genre of news footage out of it. Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. Country after country, the same grim machinery. A military, a strongman, and a population caught in between. Then there's the one country in that same neighborhood that looked at all of it and made a completely different bet. In 1948, fresh off winning its own brief, brutal civil war, this country's new leader did something no victorious military commander in history had ever done. He disbanded his own army, permanently, and handed the country back to civilians. Everyone assumed that decision would leave the place defenseless. Instead, it became the most stable, prosperous democracy in the region, a place where people now live longer than anywhere else in the Americas except Canada. This is Costa Rica, and right now, the very bet this whole story is built on is being tested harder than it has been in 75 years. Let's deconstruct it. To understand why a man who just won a war would immediately give up the tool that won it, you have to see what almost happened instead. Costa Rica came within one disputed election of becoming just another entry on that list of Central American strongmen. Get the sequence wrong, and the ending looks inevitable. It wasn't. In February 1948, Costa Rica held a presidential election. Opposition candidate Otilio Ulate won it convincingly, by most counts, around 55%. The incumbent-aligned legislature annulled the result anyway. Within weeks, the country was at war with itself. José Figueres Ferrer, an exiled farmer and political dissident, led a rebel force called the National Liberation Army against the government. The fighting lasted 44 days. It killed roughly 2,000 people, in a country of only around 600,000. Proportionally, that's a civil war on a scale most viewers would associate with an entire era, compressed into 6 weeks. Figueres won. He took power as head of a provisional junta, and for the next 18 months, he could have simply kept it. He'd just proven, by force, that he controlled the only army in the country. And here's the detail that genuinely surprised me researching this. He didn't keep it. On December 1st, 1948, Figueres walked into the Bellavista military barracks in San Jose, picked up a sledgehammer, and smashed a hole in the wall himself, declaring the army permanently abolished, on the spot. Then, 18 months after winning the war outright, he handed the presidency to Otilio Ulate, the man whose stolen election had started the whole conflict in the first place. He'd had the guns. He gave them up and gave the country back to the man who'd actually won it. So what do you actually do with a military budget once there's no military left to fund? This is where the story stops being about one dramatic afternoon and starts being about 75 years of accumulated, unglamorous decisions. And those decisions are the real reason this story is worth your time, not the sledgehammer. Costa Rica had actually started building universal healthcare a few years before the war, in 1941, through a program called the Caja Costarricense de Seguro Social. But without a military budget competing for the money, that program and the country's schools expanded relentlessly for decades, covering workers' dependents through the 1960s, rural and low-income populations through the 1970s, and eventually becoming mandatory for anyone living in the country at all. Literacy climbed to around 96%. In the year 2000, the World Health Organization ranked national healthcare systems worldwide. Costa Rica came in 36th. The United States, spending vastly more per person, came in 37th, one spot behind. Think about your own last visit to a doctor. The paperwork, the bill, the insurance call. Costa Ricans built a system, funded in real part by money that would otherwise have paid for rifles and uniforms, where that whole interaction looks fundamentally different. Today, people in Costa Rica live longer, on average, than anywhere else in the Americas except Canada. That isn't an accident of climate or diet. That's what 75 years of unspent military budgets actually buys. Peace and healthcare weren't the only radical bets this country made. Two more decisions, made decades apart, turned out to be just as unusual and just as important. One, almost nobody else in the region has managed to copy. The other, almost nobody was even trying. If you're getting something out of this, subscribing takes 2 seconds, and the next one of these just lands in your feed. Anyway, the first bet was on democracy itself, and it compounded quietly for decades. While its neighbors cycled through coups, civil wars, and military dictatorships for the rest of the 20th century, Costa Rica just kept holding elections and kept handing over power peacefully. By the time the Cold War ended, it was the only country in the region that could say it hadn't had a single coup since 1948, a genuinely rare claim in that part of the world, then or now. The second bet was environmental, and it started from a much worse position than you'd expect. By 1990, Costa Rica had cut down so much of its own forest that only around 21% of the country was still covered in trees. In 1997, the government created a program that paid landowners directly to keep forests standing instead of clearing them, treating a tree left alone as something the country was willing to buy, not just something in the way of farmland. By 2005, forest cover had climbed back above 52%. Costa Rica remains the only tropical country on Earth to have fully reversed its own deforestation. By 2019, the country was generating 99% of its electricity from renewable sources. Put all three bets side by side, no army, unbroken democracy, reverse deforestation, and you get a country that has spent 75 years consistently choosing the harder, slower, less obviously profitable option, and winning on it 3 separate times. So far, this sounds close to a perfect story, and perfect stories are usually where you should slow down. Two things complicate this picture, and both are worth being precise about rather than simply impressed by. First, the precision problem. Costa Rica has no army is technically true, and also a little misleading, and I think it's worth pushing back on how the claim usually gets repeated. Article 12 of the Constitution abolishes a standing army specifically. It also explicitly creates the necessary police forces to keep public order. Costa Rica maintains a public force, a coast guard, and border security units, and in recent years, that public force has taken on more weapons and training than a purely civilian police service usually carries. The country isn't unarmed. It just never lets any of those forces answer to a general instead of an elected government. That distinction is the actual achievement, not the absence of guns. Second, this wasn't a straight line to prosperity. In the early 1980s, Costa Rica went through its own genuine economic crisis. Inflation spiked, roughly half the population fell below the poverty line, and a state-heavy economic model built around protecting local industry from foreign competition had simply stopped working. The recovery that followed was a second hard rebuild, not a continuation of an unbroken success story. Both of those facts sit alongside everything in the first 3 chapters, not instead of it. Costa Rica built something real. It also had to fight for it more than once, and it built something more armed than the postcard version of this story usually admits. Right now, the founding bet from Chapter 1 is being tested in a way it hasn't been in 75 years. Not by a foreign army, by cocaine. Costa Rica sits directly on the shipping route between cocaine producers in Colombia and Ecuador and buyers in the United States and Europe, and its ports have become a preferred transit point. Traffickers have hidden tons of product inside routine banana and fruit shipments leaving the country. As rival gangs fight for control of those routes, the murder rate has climbed sharply, from around 11 per 100,000 people in 2021 to 17.2 in 2023, the most violent year in the country's recorded history, with over 900 homicides. It has stayed close to that level since. The province around the port of Limon now runs several times above the national average. The government's response has been the most aggressive security shift in decades. More police deployments, new scanning equipment at ports, and a new maximum security prison explicitly modeled on El Salvador's mass incarceration approach under Nayib Bukele. For a country whose entire identity is built on choosing police over soldiers, that's a genuinely uncomfortable pivot. And here's what I genuinely can't tell you, because it hasn't been decided yet. Whether this ends as a temporary security push that fades once the trafficking routes shift elsewhere, or as the moment Costa Rica starts becoming a more militarized version of itself. Both outcomes are still on the table as I'm making this. What we do know is this: the country that bet its entire identity on not needing a military is now spending more on security than it has in generations, trying to prove that bet was about the right kind of force, not about having none at all. "75 years ago, a man who just won a war walked into a barracks and gave that power away, betting that a country could defend itself without an army if it built something worth defending. For most of those 75 years, that bet looked not just correct, but obviously correct. Longer lives, a democracy that never wavered, forests that grew back when almost nowhere else did. So here's where I land. The lesson people usually take from Costa Rica is that abolishing the army is what made it rich and peaceful. I think that gets the causation backwards. Giving up the army was the first proof of a habit, choosing the slower, harder civilian option over and over for 3/4 of a century. And that habit is what actually built the hospitals and grew the forests back. That same habit is what's being tested right now, not by soldiers at a border, but by a security crisis the country has to solve without breaking the one rule it's kept since 1948. Costa Rica isn't proof that giving up an army makes a country rich, my friends. It's proof that a country willing to give up its army in the first place was already building something worth protecting. Costa Rica proves that the hardest, most valuable bet a country can make is choosing to build slowly instead of arming quickly. But that's not the only country that bet everything on doing the unglamorous thing right. On the other side of the world, one nation took the ultimate high-stakes gamble in the opposite direction, betting on a resource almost everyone else has turned into a curse. Say the words African country and diamonds together, and you probably picture blood diamonds and child soldiers, a resource that fuels war instead of peace. One country took those exact same starting ingredients and built the opposite outcome, from one of the poorest places on the planet to a government that funded one of the most successful public health campaigns in human history, using diamond wealth almost nobody else has managed to spend honestly. That's Botswana. The video breaks down exactly how they did it, and the crisis testing that model right now. It's on the channel.